Good day, grade 12 learners. Welcome to today's history lesson. My name is Mr. Dixon. This lesson is brought to you by the Gauteng Department of Education in collaboration with the Saibono Discovery Center. Learners, today we are going to do an overview of paper 1, but we're only going to focus on the source-based part, meaning question 1, 2, and 3 basically. But before we do that, let us just go quickly to the instructions in order for you to know how you should answer paper 1 and paper 2, but our focus today is basically just paper 1. So question 1 that you will be facing, it's got to do with in relation to the Cold War, but we're going to focus on the origin of the Cold War. Very important that we understand that. So the origin of the Cold War, we will go into detail afterwards. In fact, with each question, we will go into detail afterwards. Then question 2, independent Africa, it will be a case study of Angola. Question 3 is the civil society protest from the 1950s to the 1970s. The USA civil rights movement basically is the focus point there. Then when we go to section B, remember section A, source base, 3 questions. Section B, also 3 questions. But section B starts with question 4, the extension of the Cold War. It's a case study of Vietnam, so we're not going to deal with it. So I'm just mentioning it so that you can have an idea. But today our focus is just source-based. Question 5, independent Africa, case study of the Congo. Question 6, civil society protests from the 1950s to the 1970s. What is the focus point? The focus point is the Black Power movement at the end of the day. How should you answer your questions for paper 1 and paper 2 basically? You must answer what we call 3 questions at the end of the day. So when you answer 3 questions, it's important that 1 must be source-based and 2 must be essay basically. Or take note, if 1 is source-based, 2 essays. If 2 is source-based, 1 must be a essay. So it is quite clear, the instructions, because on the screen you can see it says at least one must be a source-based and the other one must be a essay. Then the third question can either be a source-based or essay. So simple layman's term, 1 source-based, 2 essay. 1 essay, 2 source-based basically. Learners, remember now you will answer 3 questions. It means you must spend one hour per question, and that will give it a 3. So let's quickly go to how we should interpret source-based questions. Remember now that source-based questions are basically divided into level 1, 2, and 3. Level 1 means it's extraction from the source. Then you must define the historical concept at the end of the day. Now, basically this, learners, it is actually 14 marks. This one here, it's 16 marks. But let's go to level 2. Level 2 questions, it needs you to interpret evidence from the sources. You must explain information that you've gathered from the source, and you must be able to analyze evidence from the sources basically. And that will give you 20 marks. Level 3, you must be able to interpret, evaluate. You must engage the different sources when they ask questions like comment on the usefulness, explain the usefulness, comment on the how reliable the source is, explain how reliable the source is, biasness and limitations as such. Then you must also answer questions in compare and contrast. Basically, compare means the similarities, contrast means the difference at the end of the day. But we'll go more into detail when it comes to level 3 questions at the end of the day. So let's look at what are level 1 questions all about basically. Remember, level 1 questions, it means you extract the information from the source to answer this particular question. Then they carry a maximum mark of basically 1 times 1, 2 times 1, 1 times 2, 3 times 1, sometimes 4 times 1 also basically. Then there are question verbs. So the question verbs informs us that this is a level 1 question. So the first question verb that you can see on the screen is list. Then the second one is quote. So when they say quote means copy paste basically. List means just write what has been listed there basically. Don't write the entire sentence or entire paragraph. Just write what has been listed. Just copy paste what needs to. If it's a sentence, it must be copy, because it says quote means copy paste basically. Then the word identify, name. Those are what we call question verbs at the end of the day. Then we find typical level 1 questions, and they are as follows. What information in the source tells you about? Quote two reasons from the source. What do you understand by the term according to the source? Now, these are typical level 1 questions and question 1 question verbs basically. Now, let's go to level 2 quickly. Level 2 questions require you to interpret, analyze, and engage with evidence from the sources. These questions, they carry a maximum mark of 2 times 2 basically. The question verbs are as follows. They are organized, describe, comment, and explain. That also, once you see these words now informs me as the reader that this is a level 2 question basically. So you must familiarize yourself with these question verbs basically. Then typical questions are as follows. What message does the cartoonist convey? Explain in your own words. Why do you think they are using this word in this particular source basically? Then according to the source in your own knowledge at the end of the day. So let's move into level 3 questions. So level 3 questions require you to explain the different perspectives with regards to how reliable is the source, usefulness of the source, and limitations basically. And they carry a maximum mark of 8 for paragraph and 4 for reliable, usefulness, and limitations at the end of the day. Now, what are the question verbs? Compare, contrast, comment, and also words like explain or justify. Then we can see explain to what extent the evidence in source 1a can be compared to the evidence in 1b basically. Then you must comment on the usefulness, how reliable, and the limitations also. But let's go further into this thing now. Now, remember now, uh, the question is posed, but the other important point for you in order to answer this question correctly is by understanding the mark allocation basically. So the number in front indicates unto us the amount of answers you must provide. And on the screen, you can see it says the amount of responses that is needed basically. So you can see the first number that is circled in red is the number of responses of the number of answers you must provide. The number at the back basically is the amount of marks that will be given for the response that you are going to give. Like at the bottom one, we see 2 times 2. It means 2 answers, but 1 answer is 2 marks. So what is the amount of answers you will receive? 4 at the end of the day. So when you see the mark allocation as on the screen, 1 times 1 equals 1, 2 times 1 equals 2, 3 times 1 equals 3. This means they are extractions. The answers are where? In the source. So if you see a mark allocation of 1 times 2, it means you must have studied the concept, because now you must be able to interpret this particular answer. Even further, if you see 2 times 2, it means interpretation. You must be able to analyze this particular question that is being posed to you. It means now you must have studied the work, because if you have no content knowledge pertaining to the Cold War or the origin of the Cold War, it will become difficult for you to answer these particular questions now. Then the types of level 3 questions, like I've mentioned earlier, it's how does the source support each other, compare, contrast, basically biasness, reliable, usefulness, and limitations at the same time. But let's go and look at how do we answer support. How does source 1a support 1b? And what is support? Support actually means how similar are these sources to each other. In layman's term, how are they the same basically? Then what do I do now? What do I do? You go to 1a and you find something in that source that is supported or that says the same thing in 1b basically. So how do you write it down? Your answer will be as follows. Source 1a, so this is what you write down. Source 1a says there are violent people, and this is supported by 1c, which says or shows us, or if it's a visual source, it shows us the violence basically, and that will give you 2 marks. Now you must go back, learners. You must go back and find other 2 examples, one from 1a, one from 1b at the end of, and that will give you your 4 marks at the end of the day. So what is contrast? Contrast means opposition. It means it is not the same. So what do you do basically? And this is how you must write it down. You write it down by saying source 1A says the, the people are using peace, and this is contradicted in 1B, which says the people were using violence. Can you see the contradiction of peace and violence? Now you go back. You go to 1A and you say that the people were transported by cars. And 1B says, and it's contradicted by 1B, which says that the people were transported by a train, basically. So what's the contradiction? Train and cars. And there you have your four answers, basically. Then we need to look at how the sources are biased. Now take note, biasness means it's from one side, or one person, or one country, or one company's opinion or feeling about a particular matter, basically. And the view is limited. Why? Because it's from one individual at the end of the day. So we need to look at the motive at the same time also. Then let's look at how reliable a source can be. There's two things that we need to ask ourselves first. Is it accurate? Can it be trusted? But that's not the answer. It's guiding you to the answer. So what is the answer actually? Now, after you say yes to the two questions, accurate, trusted, yes. Now you write down the answer. Who wrote it? So now you look who wrote it. Now you say this source was written by Piet van der Merwe. 2 marks. When was it? When was the source made? The source was made in 1945. Another 2 marks. So now we can clearly see, we look at who wrote it. We look at the date also. Why was it created? This source was created to inform us how the Cold War started at the end of the day. Is the evidence in the source consistent with evidence from other sources? Is it consistent, basically? So it means now, if we are dealing with a source that informs us that the Cold War was started by the USA and the Soviet Union, so the other three sources must also have the same viewpoint, basically, that it was started by USA and USSR at the end of the day. And that's how we answer how reliable is the source. Let's look at usefulness. Usefulness, we need to ask ourselves these 4 questions, and they will lead us basically to answer the questions. Now take note, reliable and usefulness are asked in 2 ways: comment and explain, basically. That's how it's being asked. So when they say comment on the usefulness of the source, then we need to go and ask ourselves 4 questions. Is it accurate? It means now, yes, the source is already useful. Now the question asks, is it accurate, basically? Now you must say, now how do we know a source is accurate? When we look at the date, when we look at who wrote that particular source, basically. Does it mean what it says? So it means, is it really what transpired during that time of this particular event? Can it be corroborated with other sources? Can it be corroborated with 1A, 1B? Who produced it? There we see now the author. Again, who is the author? Who produced it? And why was it produced at the same time? So accurate refers to the date. Who produced it refers to the individual that created this particular source, basically. Now let's go to limitations. This kind of question points normally to the quality of a source. So you'll be looking at things like biasness. Is the source reliable, basically? For example, the source may be limited because it only presents one side, one person's viewpoint, basically. It may be limited because the source is not accurate. There's no date. There is no consistency with the other sources, basically. The source may also be used as a propaganda, basically. So propaganda, we know it's to conscientize the minds of certain people. It is limited. Why? Because it contains certain motives, basically, and we need to look at the language also. So let's go to the paragraph. The paragraph, remember, it's 8 marks. How do we mark it? We use a holistical analytical rubric to mark the paragraph, basically. We must know that the paragraph question is what we call a level 3 question at the end of the day. So very important that we understand that part, basically. For example, the role, and this is how they will phrase it, basically. So explain the role, the impact, causes, effects, or significance of a particular historical event, basically, at the end of the day. So the paragraph question always relates back to the key question at the end of the day. Very important that we understand that. So once we do source 1A, we underline, we do 1B underline, 1C underline, 1D underline. So what happens is that the visual source might be speaking to another source. So we will underline the three sources basically. That where basically sometimes it becomes difficult to underline a visual source because it is just a picture or it's a cartoon basically. And the wording is basically limited at the end of the day. So what we do is we underline. Once we come to the paragraph question, now we paraphrase and we mention that this comes from source 1A. We mention this comes from 1B at the end of the day. So let's go into the first topic basically. So the first topic is what we call the origin of the Cold War. Remember now, learners, we will be going through the three questions basically that we find in paper one basically. So let's go to the origin of the Cold War. So we will be discussing briefly on the origin of the Cold War, and then we go into a source-based activity pertaining to the Cold War, and then we go to question 2, overview of that particular topic, source-based activity, then we go to the last one basically. So let's go to question 1. Origins of the Cold War in Europe basically. The end of the Second War. Why did the Cold War occur or develop? So why did the Cold War develop? We must understand the three conferences. The Iran Conference 1943, where the big three met. I'm circling it for you guys so we can see the big three. This one is, I'm just writing the letter of the country, Britain. This one is USA. This one is USSR, basically. So these people were classified as the big three. So they met at 1943 at Tehran, the capital of Iran, and they asked Stalin to repair the countries that was demolished by World War II events, basically, and Stalin agreed to it. So 2 years after that, in February, they met at Yalta. The big three again, they met at Yalta. So at the Yalta conference, it was agreed that Stalin will continue to assist them, but those countries will not become communist countries, and he agreed to it. But then they also came to another conclusion. Why did World War II start? World War II started because Hitler now informed the Germans that they will become the greatest nation because of how they were oppressed after World War I, because they had to repair the rest of the countries involved in World War I. So what initially happened basically there is they said that let's occupy Germany and divide them into 4 zones. The 4 zones was follows: French, Britain, German, and basically the US zone. So those were the 4 zones. Then they also mentioned that the capital must also be divided into 4 zones. Then they met again in the middle of the year in 1945. By that time, Roosevelt of USA died. Winston Churchill was replaced by Attlee, and Roosevelt was replaced by Harry Truman, basically. But Stalin was the only one that remained. So when they met at Potsdam, Stalin came and he said, listen, he wants reparation in the form of 20 million US dollars. Harry Truman said it will not occur because we are not going back to create World War III, what transpired to the Germans after World War I. That was basically a sour grape. It was actually sour fruit for Stalin to swallow. He was not in agreement to that, basically, because he wanted reparations in the form of money, basically. Then they agreed there that Berlin, the capital, will be divided into 4 zones. Stalin was also not happy because why was Berlin was in his zone? Why are they interfering in his zone at the end of the day? But we understand politics. You control the country. At the same time, how do you control the country? Through the capital, basically, because in the capital, there's everything that you need to control any country. Then that now was basically what we call one of the biggest sparks of the Cold War now. So what transpired now, it takes us to our next bullet here. So now the USA created what we call containment policies. But why did they create containment policies? Because in Greek and Turkey, communism wanted to evolve. So so what transpired? Harry Truman went to Congress. South Africa, we call Congress Parliament. In America, they call it Congress. He said, listen here, this is a situation. We need to stop communism in Greece and Turkey. So they grant him to introduce what we call the Truman Doctrine, and that was to provide military and financial aid to the people to the government in Turkey and Greece, basically. Then what transpired further is that they introduced what we call the Marshall Plan to the countries in Europe only. So Truman Doctrine, any country, Marshall Plan only to the countries in Europe, and that was only to provide financial aid at the same time also. With, with opposition to that, Stalin now came and he introduced communist information, meaning he sent spies into the countries in front of Russia that became communist countries, and they inquired now, and they were spying who wants to become capitalist. If they heard that this particular country wants to be capitalist, the perpetrators, the instigators were basically dealt with severely at the same time also. Then after that, very important that we understand that after the information, he introduced what we call the Molotov plan. So the Molotov plan was the same like the Marshall Plan. It was to prevent communist countries to fall prey to capitalism at the same time. So that was the first uh, uh, fire that was actually introduced after the Potsdam Conference, where the spark was ignited, basically. So this meant now the Cold War was now in full swing after the introduction of the containment policy. So now the Cold War is in full swing. So Stalin now tries to protect Berlin. So what did he do? Now he created what we call the first Berlin crisis. He blocked off all roads leading basically from West Germany into West Berlin at the end of the day. So he blocked off roads, canals, railway lines basically. So it was blocked off. So no one could, for 11 months, they could not enter into West Berlin at the end of the day basically. Then after that, uh, after the 11 months, now take note, for 11 months, over 220,000 flights were now was actually organized by the capitalist countries, the democratic countries, and South Africa was part and parcel of that also, to drop off basic necessities to the people in West Berlin, basically at the end of the day. Then we move over to the Berlin crisis again now in 1961. So 1961, Stalin died, Khrushchev took over. When Khrushchev took over, he introduced now, because a lot of people, 3,000 people a week actually, went over to West Berlin by per week basically. So now what did Khrushchev do? Khrushchev decided to build a wall. And as he built the wall, that wall separated West Berlin from East Berlin, capitalism from communism at the same time also. So that now meant the Cold War was totally in full swing now. So everyone knew the superpower for now for capital now for the capitalist countries, which was classified as the West, and the East were classified as the communists basically. So it was basically they used Europe to say all the countries on the West are capitalists. So the world now began to name all the countries that were capitalists from the Western side, all the countries that were communists, they were basically from the East at the end of the day. Then the capitalist countries, they created what we call military alliances basically, and they created the capitalist countries created NATO, and the East basically they created what we call Warsaw Pact at the end of the day. Now the question is, who was to blame for the war? Was the USA to blame, or were Russia to blame for the origin of the Cold War basically? And that is being debated up until today. Let's go quickly to a question, to a source, and then from the source we'll go to a question. We have a source there basically. Let me read the caption. The cartoon by Goof Hook titled the men are becoming jumpy as the Berlin crisis deepens, comrade. Now let's read on the side the boards there. It says, attention, Western sector, defectors, welcome. Let's go to the bottom one. The wall was constructed with the genuine communist bloc for the protection of good communists, basically. So this is now from from American side about what's happening in East Berlin, basically. Now let's go to the questions. 1.5.1. Explain whether you consider the words. Explain whether you consider the words "the men are becoming more jumpy as the Berlin crisis deepens, comrade" to be a appropriate caption for the cartoon. The mark allocation 1 times 2, meaning one answer is provided, but we have numerous answers basically. So now candidate should take a stance. Is it appropriate or not appropriate, basically? So let's look at the appropriate answer. If they say it's appropriate, it shows ISBA learners, including soldiers, security guards trying to escape, jump over the wall to West Berlin for a better life. Now remember, learners, as the question is being posed here, we need to look at keywords that will link us, basically. So this entire thing here, it is basically our keywords, basically. So we need to, other keyword is appropriate. Is it appropriate to use this as a caption or not? So the appropriate answer is, like I read it first, it shows East Berliners, including soldiers, security guards trying to escape, jump over the wall to West Berlin for a better life. The second one that could have been provided there. So this will give ourselves 2 marks. It suggests that desperate, dissatisfied soldiers use a variety of methods to escape by jumping over the Berlin Wall to West Berlin, basically. So, but remember, we only need 2 answers at the end of the day. If the candidate indicated not appropriate, then the answer should look as follows. The message on the wall states that the wall was constructed for the protection of good communists, yet communist soldiers are trying to escape. And that will give us another 2. But remember, we only need 1 mark, and that mark will be not 1 mark, 1 answer, and it will be 2 marks, basically. Let's look at the following question and the answer. 1.5.2. Comment on the implication of the message on the signpost on the western sector side. Defectors, welcome. Let's go to the answers. Remember, mark allocation, 1 answer. It reads as follows. It says, Western sector allowed, encouraged the defectors from East Berlin. The Western sector was better than the Eastern sector, basically. Let's go to the next question. 1.5.3. What conclusion can you, from the body language of the 2 generals in the foreground, in the context of defection that were taking place? The mark allocation 1 times 2. The answers are as follows. They could do nothing to stop defectors, meaning they were helpless. They were no longer concerned with those defecting to the Western sector. They believed that the Berlin crisis had deepened to such an extent that defection were no longer unavoidable at the same time. Let's go to our next topic. Our next topic is the case study of Angola. It is important, learners, that this is just an overview. We're not going into detail pertaining to this particular title or topic that we are going to deal with. So we're just going to browse through it, basically. Angola, colonialism and independence. Very important that Angola received the independence when 1975 from who? From the Portuguese. After that, a civil war broke out. But the civil war broke out before they received the independence in 1975. And after they received the independence, there were 3 political organizations, the MPLA, FNLA, and UNITA. Now, UNITA, they were with the capitalists, basically. MPLA, communists. The FNLA, they were divided there and that side there. So their loyalty was split in between, basically. Reasons for the nature of involvement in Angola, basically. So South Africa was involved because they were capitalists, and they supported the Americans, and they supported UNITA also. But why was South Africa also involved? Because MPLA became the ruling party after the independence. So if Angola becomes a communist country, Namibia was a province of South Africa. South Africa would also become a communist country, and this is the reason why South Africa was involved. Why the Americans? The Americans supported the South Africans financially and UNITA at the same time also financially, and that was basically to ensure that South Africa does not become basically the southern tip of Africa does not become a communist sector, basically. Uh, Cuba became involved because they were communists, and they were asked to come and assist the military of the MPLA in order to defeat UNITA and the South African Defense Force, basically. Then USSR, they were communists and they provided weapons to the MPLA and the Cubans at the same time. Also, China also became involved. China supported the FNLA. At the same time, they provided weapons to them. And this is why we say FNLA, they were divided, basically. Then we need to understand that it had impact on different regions. Like the MPLA was from the northern western part, UNITA was from the southern part, FNLA from the eastern part, basically. And it impacted those different parts because they were now classified as the communist side and the capitalist side at the same time also. But what happened is various negotiations were held, like the Lusaka conference was basically held, where they could not come to an agreement, but yet ceasefire was agreed upon during the Lusaka conference, basically. So we need to understand Lusaka as the capital of Zambia. So they were had to go to a neutral country at the same time also. Then the significance of the Battle of Cuto Canaveral from 1987 to 1988. Cuto Canaveral was basically on the southern tip of Angola. The South African Defense Force, with the assistance of UNITA, drove MPLA back. But when the Cubans came along, the South African Defense Force was driven back with UNITA into the northern part of Namibia. And during that process, as the Cubans and MPLA were marching towards the northern part of Angola to demolish the South African Defense Force, they met, the leaders of the different countries met in New York, and they signed resolution 435, meaning they gave Namibia back their independence. So that means in 1989, Namibia was no longer a province of South Africa, but an independent country. So this is just an overview of the case study of Angola as a country. Now let's go into the source. From the source, a question will be provided, and then we'll take it from there. Question 2, Angola. The source below is an extract from a book titled The Mission, A Life for Freedom in South Africa by D. Goldberg, a white anti-apartheid activist. It explains how Cuba and her allies succeeded in driving the South African Defense Force out of Cuto Canaveral into eastern Angola, basically. Let me read the source. In 1987 was a turning point in Southern Africa. At Cuto Canaveral in eastern Angola, the final confrontation took place between Cuba and Savimbi's National Union for the Total Independence of Angola, UNITA. It was the greatest battle on the African continent since the end of World War II. The South African army that had marched with the backing of the United States had to withdraw. The Cuban contribution was enormous and having assist in the struggle for the recognition of Angola's sovereignty, Cuba had to withdraw all its forces after having defeated the South African army at Cuto Canaveral. The Soviet Union's contribution was protection, which gave Angola air superiority against South Africa was crucial. And at a psychological level, it was important in Southern Africa that white South Africans could be killed by bullets fired by black South Africans and black Cubans. To be white did not make apartheid a soldier's bulletproof. In 1988, 1 month before the end of Ronald Reagan's presidency, the Third Party Treaty, which means the Tripartite Accord that ensured Namibia's independence, was signed in New York by Angola, Cuba, and South Africa. The treaty provided for the withdrawal of all Cuban military personnel within 30 minutes. The left-wing ANC's friendly government in Angola remained in office, and our case was won, basically. Let's go to the question. Explain the limitations of the source to a historian researching the outcome of the Battle of Cuto Canaveral. Remember now, when it comes to the limitations, if there's no date, if there's no author, if it doesn't inform us, if there's no corroboration with others, it limits the source, basically. If the source is from one point of view, it limits the source also. The source is limited because it was written by D. Goldman, an anti-apartheid activist, thus one-sidedness. It highlights the MPLA's victory. That's another point. The language used is biased against South Africa and the United States, Cuba. Soviet Union contributions was enormous in supporting, so they are being biased towards Cuba and the Soviet Union at the same time, basically. The writer portrays South Africa and United States as the aggressor who denied Angolans their independence. So it means now, learners, Cuba, MPLA, they defeated the South Africans. So they are not mentioning that they were aggressive. They're only saying that the South Africans in the United States were aggressive, basically. And that mark allocation, we can see 2 times 2. It means we only need 2 answers. So there's 2, there's 2, there's 2. But remember, we only need 2 answers. It doesn't mean that we don't need another, the last one. No. If one of the 2 are not there and that one is there, then it means 4 answers at the end of the day. Now let's go to our last topic, basically. So our last topic, it is what we call an overview of the civil rights movement, basically. So we will do the overview, and then we'll have a break. And on our return, learners, we will basically go into the sources, and then we'll take it in from there, basically. So let's quickly go to the overview, basically. So reasons and origins of the civil rights movement in the USA. So what was the reasons and origins of the civil rights movement in the USA? First of all, African Americans were oppressed in the 13 southern states within America. In the 13 southern states, after the signing of the abolitions of slavery in the world, basically, the 13 southern states still practice slavery, basically. And what did they introduce in the 13 southern states? They introduced what we call the Jim Crow laws. So the Jim Crow laws was basically segregation laws like the apartheid laws in South Africa. But the Jim Crow laws was not actually the original name. It was called Black Codes. So Jim Crow was basically a song that was sang by someone insulting how African Americans lived in America during that period and time, basically. But after they signed it in 1963, the abolition of slavery still continued. Basically, there were still segregation laws. And it forced African Americans now to make a stance against this. People like Marcus Garvey, they were the people that actually initiated this process, basically. Then the origin of the civil rights movement, basically, very important. It started off by the Rosa Parks incident, basically. So it's important that we understand it started off by the Rosa Parks incident. Then that led now to what we call the Montgomery bus boycott. Then it went to the sit-ins. And after the sit-ins, it went to the freedom rides. After the freedom rides, it went to the Birmingham campaign. After the Birmingham campaign, it went to the Lincoln Memorial March. After the Lincoln Memorial March, it went to the Selma Montgomery March. But between the Lincoln Memorial March and the Selma Montgomery March, it was what we call the Freedom Summers, where they were educating people how to read and write at the same time also. But we'll go now into detail. Then the schools desegregation, we'll not talk about the short-term, long-term gains, we'll not talk about. So now we can clearly see. So 1954, it was the Linda Brown issue where she was refused to attend a nearby school and she was only 7 years old. So they went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ruled that schools in the southern state must be desegregated, meaning it was illegal to have segregation after the 1863 abolition of slavery was signed basically in America. Then 1955, this was now the start of the civil rights movement. Remember now, this was the start of the civil rights movement, the Rosa Parks incident where she was arrested. And why was she arrested? Because she refused to give up a seat to a white male passenger. And that led now to the Montgomery bus boycott, which lasted for 13 months, basically, where African Americans decided they are not going to ride the buses in Montgomery anymore. So they had lift clubs, some walk to work, some use bicycles to go to work. Then that basically led now to the end in 1950. Remember, it was 13 months. So it ended in 1956. At the same time, Martin Luther came now to the forefront with the Montgomery bus boycott. That is where the voice of Martin Luther King became evident, basically. Remember now, Martin Luther King was a Baptist preacher, and because he was a Baptist preacher, he was very affluent and he was a very eloquent speaker at the same time, also. So, what transpired is during this whole process, with the Montgomery bus boycott, his house was bombed because he was the leader of the Montgomery bus boycott. So, the bus owners decided, let us desegregate buses in in Montgomery, because they had a loss of basically between 65 and 75% income during that time, basically. Then it 1957, Little Rock. So we're not going to touch Little Rock. So let's jump Little Rock. Let's go to 1960. In 1960, it was the sit-ins, basically. We see Greenboro sit-ins. So Greenboro was basically a town in North Carolina, and four African American students went to the Woolworths lunch counter. They were sitting there at the white only section. They were refused service on the first day. Next day they came back with more students, basically. And the sit-ins did not only stop at the Woolworths lunch counter, it spread to different shops, basically Woolworths sit-ins in the southern part of the 13 states. At the same time, learners, it was not only the sit-ins, it became library-ins. They went into the white-only library and they sat in there. Then they went into the swimming pools, then they went into the beaches, into the movie theaters, into the different public places. And because of that, public places were desegregated because of the sit-ins. Then after the sit-ins in 1961, it was the Freedom Rides. The Freedom Rides, 13 multiracial students, they traveled basically from the northern part, take note, from the northern part of America, and they traveled into the southern part of America. And when they travel from the northern part into the southern part of America, and this is what basically transpired. They came into Alabama, the state of Alabama. One of the buses was set alight because remember it's 13 multiracial students, and they were sitting mixed in the two buses. So one of the buses was set alight. It was live on television. It was broadcast to the entire America. And what transpired is that Robert Kennedy said that interstate buses must be desegregated. Another victory for the civil rights movement, basically. First victory at the Montgomery, where buses were desegregated, sit-ins, public places were desegregated, interstate buses were desegregated, and we move now over to what we basically call 1963. We see on the screen, it speaks about the Children's Crusade, and it speaks about the Birmingham church bombing, basically. So the Birmingham campaign was basically Martin Luther King. Take note, Martin Luther King started the civil rights movement. He became the voice of the civil rights movement in 1955. Sit-ins, he was not part of that thing, but he supported it. He was very articulated. He was very vocal. Then the freedom rights, he was not part and parcel, but he supported it by voicing his opinion pertaining to the freedom rights, basically. But in 1961, he went to Birmingham and he started what we call the implementation of the Satyagraha. So Satyagraha was basically a violent, a non-violent way of protesting. It was Satyagraha was a tactic introduced by Mahatma Gandhi. So Martin Luther King just adopted that and he said, this is how we are going to protest. We are going into a white-only section and we will sit there. We will not be violent towards the authorities. The authorities means the police. But as they were moving into the white-only section, basically, or shops, they were removed violently by the police. Children also became part of this protest. And when children became part and parcel of this protest, learners, what transpired is that children began to fill the prisons, and the prisons were too full, and they were housed into different places, different buildings, basically, and they were locked up, basically. And because of prisons becoming overcrowded, what transpired is the business owners realized that this yeah, this protest is getting too much because why people just remain within their homes and they were not coming to the shopping malls, or that time there was no shopping malls but to the shops to buy from them. So what happens is the shop owners decided to desegregate the shops and the workplaces at the same time also. So meaning now they said, let's stop the segregation part and let's desegregate. Remember, segregation means separation. Desegregation means integration, pulling people together at the same time also. So the Birmingham campaign became very effective because why? Fountain drinks were open and it was desegregated. African Americans were not hired last and fired first anymore. That changed because of the Birmingham campaign. This now led basically to the 1963, also where Martin Luther King was basically part and parcel of this organization, and the leader of this was Randolph basically. So Randolph now organized the Lincoln Memorial March basically. So they met in Washington. They walked basically 1.7 kilometers from a particular place in Washington to the Lincoln Memorial statue basically, and it was basically over 250 men that congregated basically from different creeds, different races, got together in March. And the main aim for the Lincoln Memorial March was to celebrate the abolition of slavery in 1963, which was already a century. At the same time, learners, it was basically also to march against the oppression of jobs against African Americans at the same time. But this march actually changed where Martin Luther King had his famous speech, I have a dream. Take note, this changed because he said, I have a dream, basically, and it changed basically. And that led now to the signing of what, learners? Think nicely. It led basically to the signing of a act, and you need to know that act. You need to go and study. I'm just saying it led to the signing of the act, and the signing of that act means every segregation in America must be stopped. It means no one must be prejudiced towards the next one, basically. So please go look up the act that was signed because of the Lincoln Memorial. So I'm giving you homework at the same time also. Look at that act that was signed off. But remember now, President Kennedy introduced the signing of this act, but it was not signed by President Kennedy. It was signed off by Martin Luther King Jr. and President Lyndon Johnson, basically. So go and look up that act. It's important that you know that act. But although that act, I'm not going to mention it, although that act was signed, there was still segregation when it came basically, and prejudice when it came to the voting in the southern states. Only 2% of African Americans were educated. So what happened is the educated African Americans, they started what we call a freedom summer, basically freedom schools. It means now they went around and they were teaching people how to read and write in order for them to pass the literacy test that they had to write before they had to vote. So before voting takes place, African Americans had to write the literacy test. So the freedom summers, the freedom schools actually was there to ensure that African Americans can read and write. But the incident happened because as people were protesting, what happened is Jackson, his grandparents was shot, and as his parents was shot uh, and beaten up also, he came and he intervened and they shot him. So the police said it was in self-defense because Jackson was trying to attack them at the same time. So this led now to Reverend Lewis start what we call the Selma Montgomery March. So on the 7th of March, 1965, take note, on the 7th of March 1965, Reverend Lewis got a group of people. They wanted to march from Selma to Montgomery. So in Selma, there's a bridge called the Edmund Bridge. They got to the Edmund Bridge. When they got to the Edmund Bridge, the paratroopers, which was the police, indicated to them turn back because this march is illegal. Then they refused to turn back and they were beaten up, and that was called a Bloody Sunday, basically, where they were beaten up. So on the 9th of March 1965, they came back, but with more people, and Martin Luther King was with them that time. Remember, 1st March, Reverend Lewis 2nd March, 9th March, Martin Luther King came back with them. And as the paratroopers informed them, turn back, the march illegal, they turned back. On the 19th of March, leading up until the 21st of March, the Supreme Court ruled that the march from Selma to Montgomery is legal. On the 21st of March, they marched to, now basically to, from Selma to Montgomery. About 20,000 people joined them as they were marching along the way. And then on basically on the 6th of August 1965, the Voting Rights Act was signed off by Lyndon Johnson, meaning African Americans had, there was no need for them to actually write the literacy test, basically. So learners, 1968, the Civil Rights Act was passed. Remember now, I spoke about an act that was signed off by Lyndon Johnson in 65 in 1964, basically. And remember now that in 1968, the Civil Rights Act was passed, basically. So that actually meant, learners, that the Civil Rights Act brought a lot of changes to the lives of African Americans. Learners, let's go for a break. On my return, we will just do some activities and then we'll end off. Thank you. Good day, grade 12 learners. Welcome back to our history lesson. Please remember that we are still continuing with the origin of the Cold War, uh, which was question 1. Question 2 was Angola. Now we are dealing with question 3, which is the civil rights movement, basically. Remember that we dealt with the content of question 3, the civil rights movement, and we went through the different forms of protest. And now we are going to deal with our source-based activities, how you should answer a source question, basically. So let's move over to source 3b. Let me read the source and the caption and then the source, and then we'll go to the questions, basically. So the first question we are going to deal with is a compare question, how you should answer that. So we will be reverting back to and forth from the different sources just to give a clear indication how you should answer this particular question. So let's quickly go to the caption. It says there, this source was written from an article titled Motivation and Sacrifices by Clark J. Spencer. It explains the white involvement in the civil rights movement. The SNCC stepped up its voters registration activity in Mississippi and headed off the general elections of November 1963. Its organization, a freedom vote, which would allow black Mississippians to register and vote in a symbolic election that followed exactly the state procedure. Much of the registration work of the freedom vote was conducted by white volunteers from northern universities. The success of the freedom vote persuaded the SNCC to embark on a larger Mississippi-wide project, the Mississippi Summer Project, also known as Freedom Summer, during 1964. As with the freedom vote, the SNCC again decided to use white students as volunteers, although this was the subject of considerable discussion within the SNCC. While some thought that such volunteers would help gain publicity for Freedom Summer, others believed that the presence of whites undermined black self-reliance and placed too much emphasis on white leadership, basically. This discussions reflected wider concerns within the SNCC about the role of whites in the civil rights movement. As the number of whites working with the SNCC grew in 1964, around 20% of the SNCC staff was white. Some black activists feared that they would begin to dominate, even if unconsciously, and reduce the role of blacks within the SNCC, as well as alienating, separating the black Mississippians who were to be the focus of Freedom Summer. As a compromise, the Southern Student Organization Committee, the SSOC, was formed and was initially considered a white counterpart to the SNCC. Despite the formation of the SSOC, many Freedom Summer volunteers were white people, basically. Let's go to source 3C. 3C is a visual source, basically. The photo below was taken by Leveler Warren K. on 20 August 1964. It shows African Americans and white volunteers of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party holding signs in front of the convention hall at the 1964 Democratic National Elections, Atlantic City, New Jersey, basically. So we can see the different type of posters. If I can look basically at this poster here, I can see 1 million Mississippian Negroes, and then I say D represent, and then I can see we shall overcome, I think, freedom now, basically. So there's different posters for different reasons, but let's go to the question quickly. So the question is as follows. It says, study source 3C and B at the same time. Study sources 3B and C. Comment on how the events in source 3B supports the information in source 3C regarding the involvement of white volunteers in the Freedom Summer campaign, basically. Mark allocation 2 times 2 equals 4, basically. So the focus is the involvement of white volunteers in the Freedom Summer, basically. Let's go to the answers. Remember, it's a level 3 question. Let's look at the answers. Both sources state that white volunteers participated in the Freedom Summer campaign. Learners, you see the word white volunteers, we can see the white volunteers, but in B, it actually mentions that white volunteers were involved. But in C, the visual source, we see how the white people are standing in front and they were part of this protest. And this is why we can use the word both sources, basically, because it's the same thing. Both sources state that white participants came together with African Americans to demand voting rights for African Americans. So the first answer there indicates whites were involved. Then we see here whites were mixing with the African Americans, and that will give us the four marks that we need, basically 2, and that gives us the 4 marks, basically. Let's go to source 3D. Let's read the source, and then we'll go through the answers. This source outlines the successes of the Freedom Summer campaign on African Americans in the USA in the 1960s. Despite the obstacles and dangers, the Freedom Summer profoundly impacted voter registration and political participation. African Americans registered to vote at higher rates in Mississippi and other southern states. Over 80,000 new voters had been registered by the end of the summer, a remarkable accomplishment given the ongoing campaigns to restrict African American voters' rights. The success of the Freedom Summers voter registration campaigns, it raised awareness of the problem of voter repression. It paved the way for the 1965 passing of the Voting Rights Act, which further protected and extended voting rights for African Americans and other disenfranchised communities. The voter registration drives in Mississippi were successful because of the education and the resources provided by Freedom Schools and community centers. Freedom Schools played a crucial role in building momentum for the civil rights movement in the 1960s. Throughout the South, people fought against segregation and prosecution. Conditions changed only after the Voting Rights Act of 1965, with the federal government sending its officials into local courthouses. More than half of African Americans in southern states had enrolled to vote by the end of 1966. In the years that followed, many African Americans were elected to local offices such as mayors, school boards, and chiefs of police. Many SNCC and core staff went on to fulfill important positions in government. John Lewis, remember we spoke about him earlier, about the Selma Montgomery March. John Lewis of the SNCC was elected to the U.S. Congress. Mary King of the SNCC supervised the Peace Corps and Vesta under President Carter, and Julian Bond led the NAACP. So we've read the source. Let's go to the questions quickly now. So this is the first question, 3.5.1. Using the source and your own knowledge, explain how the Freedom Summer campaign raised awareness of the problem of the voter repression. Remember now, the key is the source. You'll find the answer in your own knowledge, means you must have studied it, basically. And the key here is how the Freedom Summer campaign raised awareness. How did it raise awareness? Let's go to the answers. The Freedom Summer campaign made it impossible. So this is awareness it's telling us. The Freedom Summer campaign made it impossible for American people to ignore the racist southern states, basically. The campaign put pressure on President Johnson to pass the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Remember, I said there's an act that Lyndon Johnson signed off in 1964. It attracted sympathy for the civil rights activists as more white volunteers participated. Any other relevant responses of this? Give me 2 marks, give me 2 marks, 2 marks, but I only need 2, basically, meaning it can be this 2 here or it can be that 2, basically, at the end of the day. So learners, now we can clearly see that yes, some of them are from the source and some are from own knowledge. Own knowledge means you must have studied the content. Basically, let's go to the next question, which is a paragraph question. 3.6, using the information in the relevant sources and your own knowledge, write a paragraph of about 8 lines, about 80 words, explaining how the participation of white volunteers in Freedom Summer impacted the civil rights movement and race relation in the USA. 8 marks basically. Now let's go to the first question. Remember now that when we answered our paragraph question, remember now when you answer source 3A, you underline what's answering the key question. Remember now the key question is your paragraph question basically. So you underline 3A, you go to 3B, you underline that, you go to C, you go to D, you underline. So once you come to the paragraph question, you paraphrase. It means you don't write it down as is, you paraphrase. Learners, if you write it down word for word, it is basically called plagiarism, and plagiarism will actually enable you learners not to actually pass this particular question. Basically, it means you will receive 0 marks because you've copy pasted the sources at the end of the day. Then very important that the answers here are in bullet forms basically. So it means it's in bullet form. So what does it mean now? It means you should not answer in bullet form when you answer the paragraph question. It must be in a paragraph because it's a paragraph basically. The bullets are only basically for presentation purposes. So let's look at the different answers. Let's just get all the answers quickly. Let's go back. So the first answer here is white involvement helped to strengthen the movement or by providing additional manpower and resources. Now, learners, it's important that you indicate where you found this particular answer. Next one, the involvement of white volunteers brought national and international attention to the civil rights movement, basically. So you see how this has been paraphrased. The main topic is in the source, but it has been paraphrased, indicated again where we found this information. The presence helped to bridge a racial division as they worked alongside African Americans. Where was it found? Own knowledge. This person studied the work, and this is why own knowledge is being uh, produced here. African Americans registered to vote at higher rates. You see how it's being paraphrased. This was in the source, being paraphrased. Where was this found? Source 3D. Freedom Summer campaigns raise awareness of the segregation and discrimination in the southern states. Where was this found? 3D basically. Voting Rights Act of 1965 gave voting rights to African Americans. We see how it's paraphrased. Source 3D basically. More than half of African Americans in the southern state registered to vote by the end of 1960. This was found in 3D, but you see how it's being paraphrased. Then any other relevant responses. So learners, we basically dealt today with an overview of paper one basically, and we've dealt with all 3 questions. We have given you the content. Remember learners, to answer the source base, you must know the content. If you don't know the content, it becomes difficult to answer these types of source-based questions basically. So learners, thank you for tuning in. And before we end off, basically, it's important that we understand that we tune in on the 29th of October time. It will be basically again an overview of paper one, and we will be focusing basically on the essay part now. Remember now, this was only for the source-based section. So next time when we meet again on the 29th, it will basically be for a overview of the entire question basically. So learners, hope to see you next time. Bye.